story takes us back to the early months of a global lockdown, when a particular hiker's life was already spiraling. A job-related mishap had cost him his professional standing, and complete strangers began targeting him in vicious ways. He changed phone numbers, moved apartments, and tried to outrun the threats, but stress continued to cloud every step. Struggling to find respite, he drove 3 hours into Rocky Mountain National Park, hoping that the crisp alpine air and a flowing creek might soothe his mind. The moment he arrived, he noticed how empty the park was. Whether due to the lockdown or the lingering winter chill, the place felt almost abandoned. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he trekked deeper into the forest, eventually reaching a beautiful creek that still flowed despite the cold. He found the perfect spot off the main trail and pitched his tent. It was the kind of setting that postcard companies dream about: serene, remote, and shielded by tall evergreen trees. After setting up camp, he lit a fire, cooked a modest meal, and tried to lose himself in a paperback novel. This was the detox he desperately needed, or so he thought. Just as the sky turned charcoal and the temperature dropped, he decided to roll a small joint. That's when his phone vibrated. It was an unknown number with an area code he didn't recognize. Most of us might assume it's just spam, but the text read, "How's the camping going, buddy?" The second message followed, "It's beautiful out here." A chill rippled through him. Panic eclipsed any hint of calm he'd felt seconds earlier. Someone was clearly watching him, and the messages seemed to confirm they were nearby. As he peered into the thickening darkness, it occurred to him that this was more than a random prank. He'd come to escape the harassment, but the harassers, or some new danger, had found him. Shaken, he texted back the only logical question: "Who is this?" Minutes passed. The wind whistled through the branches, and the tiny flames of his campfire felt insufficient against the looming dread. No response came. He began to pace around the campsite, scanning the tree line with his flashlight, his breath fogging in the cold air. That's when another message arrived. "Doesn't matter." By now, his heart hammered in his chest, and his mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was an old enemy from his job fiasco, or a stranger with far more sinister aims. Trying to calm himself, he holed up in his tent, flipping through YouTube videos to distract from the knot in his stomach. The paranoia, amplified by the weed, made every tiny sound outside sound monstrous. Just as he started to doze off, a new noise emerged, footsteps crunching in the snow. Slow, deliberate, circling footsteps. The dreaded crunch, crunch, crunch resonated alarmingly close. He froze, his muscles tense, and reached for his newly purchased handgun. Then, all at once, the footsteps ceased. There was an abrupt flash, like someone snapped a picture. In near-perfect horror movie fashion, his phone chimed. The new message was a photograph of his tent from the outside. Another message followed immediately: "Have a good night's sleep." Suddenly, every vestige of fear turned into raw adrenaline. Fighting the primal panic that threatened to immobilize him, he unzipped the tent and fired 2 rounds into the air. The echo bellowed through the quiet trees, and he heard frenzied footsteps sprint away. He screamed after them, rage coating his every word. The rest of the night was sleepless, but mercifully free of intrusions. By sunrise, he was certain whoever had tormented him had retreated, possibly for good. Though relief came with the morning light, he never shook the memory of those cryptic messages and the reality that someone watched him, unseen, in the dark. Not every unsettling camping story involves a solitary traveler. Sometimes it's a group of adventurous kids who discover that forests hold unimaginable fears. The next story involves a family tradition in northern Michigan, where every October relatives gathered on a 4-acre property owned by a hunting enthusiast uncle. With a large house that comfortably slept everyone, it seemed like the perfect place to celebrate the crisp autumn air. For the children in the family, the annual trip was a highlight. There were so many ways to explore the outdoors. One fall evening, 4 of the cousins, 2 brothers and 2 cousins, begged their parents to let them camp out in a tent on the property. The dads, already in good spirits from beer and hunting chatter, agreed without too much hesitation. The moms were skeptical, imagining worst-case scenarios of nighttime predators and lurking strangers. Still, the dads insisted it would be fine. They even helped set up the tent in a little clearing beyond the property line, where the mossy ground created natural bedding. Everyone looked forward to an adventurous sleepover under the stars, confident they were safe. After all, who could possibly lurk so deep in the woods? As night draped over the forest, the kids gathered flashlights, extra blankets, and a deck of cards. The atmosphere was electrifying for a group of siblings and cousins who'd never spent a night away from the main house. They zipped themselves inside the tent, turned on their flashlights, and started an endless cycle of Uno games. Laughter and playful teasing echoed amid the towering pines. But the first indication of trouble came in a single sound, a distant scream. It could have been an animal, maybe a fox, so the kids brushed it off. Then it came again, closer this time. Suddenly, the once thrilling forest turned menacing. At first, they tried rationalizing the scream as another fox or some odd nocturnal critter, but as the minutes wore on, the tension built. The youngest cousin grew teary-eyed, and the older one struggled to maintain calm. Beneath the thin fabric of the tent, every rustle in the leaves felt dangerously near, and every gust of wind rattled their nerves. Nobody dared step outside. Instead, they clicked off their flashlights, pulling blankets over their heads and hoping to fade into the darkness. The idea was to stay silent, to avoid drawing any attention. Then came the footsteps, rapid and unmistakable. Leaves crunched aggressively as something or someone barreled straight toward the tent. The kids barely had time to scream before the tent itself started shaking, as if someone was grabbing the poles and thrashing them violently. A shrieking wail, so high-pitched and human-like that it rattled their spines, pierced the air. In a flurry of terror, all 4 scrambled for the exit. The flap unzipped, and they sprinted blindly into the woods, flashlights bobbing, hearts pounding with the fear that the attacker was right behind them. Their screams tore through the quiet forest as they raced for the safety of the house. Mercifully, they made it back to find the entire family already outside, alerted by the racket. The fathers immediately armed themselves and headed into the woods to investigate. While the younger children huddled inside, the older ones couldn't stop trembling and crying, recounting how the tent had been assaulted. Oddly, when the dads returned, they found no footprints or evidence. Though everyone had theories, ranging from a sadistic prankster to a complete stranger stalking the property, no definitive answer emerged. From that night onward, the kids refused to stay out after dark. It was a lesson in how quickly an exciting adventure under starlight can flip into sheer terror. Not all threats are as blatant as a stalker rattling your tent. Sometimes the forest itself seems to come alive in ways that defy explanation. Our third story features a father and son seeking escape from the pressures of life. They headed to a remote campground in a region steeped in Native American history, a place filled with scenic trails, a gushing river, and zip lines, perfect for outdoorsy fun. The first night was magical, with families scattered at neighboring campsites, cooking over open flames. Conversations, laughter, and the crackling of wood provided the perfect camp atmosphere they both craved. But everything changed on the second night. By then, every other camper had cleared out, and the pair learned from the staff that they were the only ones left on the entire property. Thrilled at first by the idea of having the campground to themselves, they fished, hiked, and even listened to scary podcasts by the river. As twilight descended, however, an uneasy sensation settled over them. The father and son both commented that the forest felt oddly suffocating, the sky tinted by an unnameable gloom. The air was still, and the usual comforting sounds of birds or insects had drifted away. They lit a fire, roasted marshmallows, and tried to shrug off the creeping sense that something was off. It was easier to pretend everything was normal, but inside they both felt an indefinable presence closing in. Night fully fell, and the only illumination came from their campfire. That's when the first bang shattered the quiet. It sounded like a massive branch snapping, or a small tree falling. 5 minutes later, a second bang resounded, this time slightly farther away. They flashed their lights into the darkness, seeing only the silhouettes of towering trees. A third bang erupted again, closer now, sparking genuine alarm. It was as if something heavy was slamming against the ground, each time changing position. When a fourth deafening thud rocked the earth within 20 yards of their campsite, the father scrambled for a small knife, his only weapon. The pair bolted into their tent, fumbling to zip it shut. The older man whispered that he'd glimpsed a wall of darkness, as if a human-shaped silhouette was standing among the trees. They tried to quiet their breathing, each heartbeat throbbing in their ears. Then a low hum vibrated through the tent, filling their chests with a terrifying resonance. Whatever was out there, it radiated a presence that transcended normal sounds. Shortly after, a gurgling, guttural noise echoed around them, unlike any animal cry they'd ever encountered. It resembled something out of a science fiction nightmare, hollow and predatory. The father pressed the knife to his chest, peering through the flimsy mesh window while the son lay rigid. Every second felt like an hour, until, inexplicably, their minds blanked out. They had no memory of trying to sleep. They just woke up hours later, exhausted and disoriented. Their phones, both fully charged the previous evening, were inexplicably dead. The campfire was reduced to cold ash, as if no one had tended it in ages. Scared beyond reason, father and son packed up their gear the following morning in complete silence. When they finally spoke in the car, they realized their experiences perfectly aligned. Both heard those heavy bangs, both felt the throbbing hum, and both blacked out at the same moment. Attempts to rationalize it, bad food, carbon monoxide poisoning, some freak power surge, never fully explained what happened. Whatever they'd encountered in those woods felt neither human nor animal, leaving them shaken to the core. Across North America and beyond, numerous forests carry whispered folklore. Some revolve around cryptid sightings, from Bigfoot to more obscure creatures rumored to inhabit remote regions. Others revolve around rumored human threats, hermit cults, drifters, or criminals who set up camp in out-of-the-way areas to avoid the law. In old pioneer stories, travelers told of shadowy figures who watched from the tree line, vanishing when approached. Over time, these stories morphed into cryptic local legends or sensational headlines, but the underlying point stands. Not every patch of forest is simply a tranquil escape. Even some national parks have controversies swirling around them, conspiracies about unexplained disappearances, hidden caverns, or government agencies conducting secret experiments. While much of that is likely fueled by overactive imaginations and the internet rumor mill, it only takes one personal incident to forever change how you perceive the wild. The father and son from the previous account will likely never camp again. The children who sprinted out of their shaking tent learned the forest can harbor dangers worse than any bedtime story. The man at Rocky Mountain National Park will probably forever look over his shoulder, gun in hand. Still, For every terrifying encounter, there are thousands who safely enjoy their camping trips, forging unforgettable memories around glowing campfires. Is it all just coincidence, or do certain people draw malevolent forces or malevolent humans to them? Stories like these remind us that remote nature offers both salvation and risk, serenity and dread. It is a place that can heal and harm, often at the same time.